So welcome to the April 2024 clinic here. I'm going to share my screen here.
Sure. Thanks, guys. Have fun.
Everybody see that okay?
Yes.
Okay, so trestle long gone there. All right, well, welcome everybody. I don't see anybody that I haven't seen before in here tonight, except for in the meeting. I think I make out most of the faces there in the distance. Is there anybody else new there, Kurt, that just adding a little fun thing here that I'll try to do every meeting. It's just kind of fun. I got handed this to a former, when I was at Boeing still, I got a former railroad superintendent that now worked for Boeing, just came in one day and he threw it at me, said, "Here you go, railroad man." And it's just a railroad terminology and jargon from BNSF. Thought it was kind of interesting. So I'm going to I'll throw out a few of these terms or jargons. I'm sure some of you will know some of them. Some of you might know all of them. Some of you might not have a clue about any of them, but we'll just do a few just for fun. So skate. Does anybody know what that refers to? I didn't. Anyone? So it's a metal skid placed on a rail in a hump yard to stop cars from running out on the lower end of the classification yard. I'd never heard that before. Evidently, it's kind of like a derail, I'd imagine. Rump rail. Anybody have a clue on this one? This one I found kind of interesting. I had no idea. Anybody?
Nope. Nope.
Side slat on a single deck stock car made from heavier than usual slats. It's placed about 4 feet above the floor to resist movement of cattle against the far sides. So I guess so your cattle don't shift and bust through the side of the car or something. Yep, rump rail. Thought that was interesting. And then the old man. This one somebody might get this. Who's the old man?
The conductor.
No.
Yardmaster.
No.
Superintendent.
There you go. It's a superintendent.
Oh, okay, yeah.
All right, is everybody seeing that?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
So this is an article that I wrote, oh gosh, probably 14 years ago. It was in Model Railroad Hobbyist, and I thought I'd dust it off and do a little clinic on it. It's kind of brief, but it's a topic that I haven't seen too many people I really get into it. Everybody's weathered and used their weathering techniques, pan pastels, oils, whatever you do to do the exterior of your railroad cars, especially gondolas. But the interior, a lot of people just spray it brown or whatever. But they have a lot of debris usually left, especially ones that are used in something like scrap metal service. They're among the most abused freight cars found on the rails. The very nature of their cargo leaves them not only scarred and dented on the body, but a whole collection of rusty debris and dust knocked loose off the trip to the reclamation furnaces. And these cars are seldom, if ever, clean due to the fact that they will probably be loaded with the same thing that they have been loaded with. So this process that I kind of just developed on my own, but it's very simple to do, and it's almost impossible to really make an error. And it turns out some fairly decent looking interiors for when you've delivered your scrap load and your car's empty going back to its point of loading. So let's get started on how we did this. So here's the materials and supplies that I used to do this. Consists of artist oils. Now I've showed 4 there. I've got burnt sienna, raw sienna, black, and what's the other one I've got here?
Ochre?
Raw umber are the four that I use. Most of the time I just use the raw umber and the burnt sienna for this process, but I have used all of them. Then I also use the odorless thinner. If you're working with oils, if you haven't used this odorless stuff, I really recommend it. Save yourself and probably your lungs. I'm sure there's still some stuff that's in the air from this stuff, but won't make your whole house smell like thinner or your whole workshop. A lot easier on the nose. An eyedropper and a paint mixing palette helps out here, and you just want to brush it. And I wouldn't use it anything close to a good high quality brush. Just this brush, you're not going to be really painting. It's going to be more of a for a texture purpose, as you'll see. And then the debris I use is pencil sharpener debris, just out of your pencil sharpener. You could probably use sawdust as well, but I like the pencil sharpener dust that you get from your electric pencil sharpener. You don't want to use a hand one because it peels it off in big, almost like a veneer, the way it peels off like off a tree or something. But if you use an electric pencil sharpener, you get this nice fine dust, and it's multicolored and got a nice texture to it. And then weathering powders, just browns and oranges that represent rust. So our victim here for this clinic is a old Milwaukee road car that I've patched out for my railroad, the Washington Northern. And applying the base coat is the first step. So what we do is we use the artist oils, and you thin them out to about the consistency of like normal house paint. Not real thin, but not thick either. And the goal is to kind of coat the whole inside of the car. Just kind of slather it on the bottom, and then for the sides, I do try to use upward brush strokes. So if there is any visible brush stroke in the paint, it'll be vertical instead of sideways, which would not look appropriate. And in this photo, I'm using burnt sienna here to achieve that. So adding the texture, then comes the pencil shaving. Is there any other small scale metal looking odds and ends from your scrap box? I have a coffee can, just any kits or anything that I build, just little pieces of plastic, even sprues. I'll just cut it up into a bunch of little pieces, even pieces like aluminum foil or something like that. And at some point you'll see, we'll give an update on my layout here, but I've got quite a large scrap yard, and most of the scrap in there is just these little pieces that I've just put in different piles and rusted up. And then anyway, you can use some small parts if you want. I don't know if I used any particularly in this situation here on this occasion for this car, but you can put those in there too. Anything that is larger, you'll probably want to wait till after this process is done and use a little CA to secure it if you want to have some leftover pieces of scrap that didn't get unloaded via the electromagnetic crane or however they unloaded it. The next step is to sprinkle on some of that weathering powder, and it's not any specific way to do it. I just take that little bag and I just kind of sprinkle it on there. I use several different colors. You don't need a lot of it, but it's just to kind of vary the texture and the color. Just and distribute it totally at random. A lot of times I'll leave a little extra in the very corners because those are typically probably where there'd be a little bit of stuff that might be missed from unloading. And then after that, you use your eyedropper with thinner. And what I'm doing here is I'm just kind of soaking the whole bottom of the car to kind of, I don't know why you call it, melt the weathering powders into the rest of the gunk down there at the bottom. But just give everything a good coating, and it'll help adhere everything together. It's almost as good as some kind of a glue. I suppose you could probably use like a matte medium in there if you wanted to, but I really found that there's really no need to. But I just give it a good soaking. And then the next step is you just take your brush and you just kind of dab the areas, and you kind of want to disperse any large globs of the weathering powder or chalk. Sometimes it'll come in, and it'll stick together and have blobs. So you don't want to really blend it and mix it up to make it, all one color again. You want to just leave the different colored patterns in there, and just dab it around until you're satisfied with how it looks. Just kind of soften the edges so you don't have a salt and pepper type look to it. And that's really it. You've got it done there. You'll need to have it dry. Of course, oil paints dry rather slowly, often more than a day, more than 24 hours. And when the interior of the car is dry, the debris should be held in place by the cured artist oils. And here's some examples of that. The paint, wet paint kind of goes away, and the artist oils just color the car. And then you have the weathering powder and the pencil shavings or sawdust if you wanted to use that, and any other little pieces that I kind of threw in there. And then after I've let it set for 2 or 3 days, I'll usually just blast it with a shot of dull coat over the top of it as well. And it's kind of what you get. And the nice part about this is you can put your loads right on top of it and take them back out, and it doesn't affect it. You've got a nice weathered car going both ways to the reclamation furnace and back to the scrap dealer for more loads. So very simple, very quick type of clinic. Is there any questions or comments about that?
I have a comment. I attempted to put a load in a gondola and I dumped glue on top of it. I think I used Elmer's glue mixed with water. And I didn't pick a very good place to put the gondola, and much to my surprise, the gondola was not watertight. So you might want to consider putting something you don't really care about under these cars when you do this.
Yeah, I suppose there are some models, especially some of the newer models. These here, like I said, I did this. Most of these photographs are on the old layout, and they're probably 14 years old. I think this article came out in 2010. And they were just the old Athearn and roundhouse solid piece bodies, so there was no danger of having a leak out the bottom. Now some of the newer models, the high fidelity models, they have the drop ins on them and stuff like that, and I can see where that might, you might have a leakage problem on some of it. But yeah, you can do a fleet of scrap gons in an evening, because it's not time consuming, it's not tedious, you're not being precise. You're just giving a nice kind of dirty look to the inside of the cars, and adds some nice detail to the rolling stock.
Kevin, just a question. The base coat you're putting on, do you just use one color for that, or do you vary that as well around the sides?
So looking at some of the pictures of the ones I shown earlier, you'll notice that like this one is definitely more of a brown shade. It's almost looked like there's maybe some kind of dirt was in there with it. This one's a little bit more, orange. So you don't have to vary the color of the paint for the bottom. I use the burnt sienna and the raw umber for almost all these. I think in one occasion I used a little black. I think there was a card that I did that I think was a light blue. It was and it just didn't cover or look right. It needed some more dark to it, so I added some black oil to it. But for the most part, I don't really vary that too much. I just pick a color, and this one here I think is just a raw umber, and just plop it in there.
And how about the chalk on the sides? Do you tip it to the side and try to put a little chalk on the side?
Yeah. What I'll what I've done, what I didn't mention in here too, as I have done, once you get the chalk in the side here and it's all dry, sometimes I'll just take weathering powder, be a pan pastels or whatever, and I'll just
Oh, yeah.
swipe up on the sides, you
So
know,
that's a good idea.
to
Yeah,
finish that. Because
right.
you really don't want too much. I can't imagine most of this stuff's actually going to stick to the sides. You know, most of the debris, it's gonna fall to the bottom.
Yeah.
So yeah, I
So
just
like
use the
like
vertical
that one,
strokes and
like that one on the left in this picture, you did some of that with pan pastel.
yeah.
Yeah. All right. Thanks.
Kevin,
Uh-huh.
I got two questions for you. Can
Sure.
you kind of use acrylics or watercolor paints instead of oil?
You probably could. I haven't tried it with that. My experience with acrylics is it dries rather quickly, which, you know, is good if you can get all the steps done before it starts to, you know, firm
Well, I
up on
was
you.
using like the tube type acrylics, you know.
Yeah,
that
yeah. I mean, it's a pretty fast process, so you could probably get away with that. The only problem with that, with this technique, is the step where you do the eye dropping here, which just kind of, with the thinner, it kind of, I mean, I don't know if water would work as well.
Well, I would use like a 75% isopropyl alcohol or
Yeah, maybe
something
something like that. You could definitely try it. It's probably worth a try.
You can also get acrylic thinner.
Yeah,
Yeah,
acrylic thinner too would work.
true,
It's a
true.
little bit more expensive.
So Kevin, your technique is great. It looks great results wise. When we've seen some articles in the past about distressing the walls and tops of the gondolas,
Mm-hmm.
would you do that prior to your technique?
You know, I've tried that, and I have to admit my efforts have been a epic fail. um, I I've tried using a heat gun, and because I've seen people use like wood burning tools or even a soldering iron, um, not only does it make a horrible odor when you're burning plastic, but I did it. This the results of it didn't look right to me. It just, you know, it looked like melted plastic rather than dented metal. Now I've actually seen people take very thin styrene and cut it to the size of the metal between the ribs on the side of the gondola, but make it slightly wider. And the very thin styrene will actually make a bulge on the outside, and then they'll paint the whole car again. I don't have the patience to do that. I mean, if I was making a competition model, maybe I'd try something like that. But I don't know. Has anybody else tried to do the dent technique with you know, using heat? I've tried it a couple times on old pieces, and I just was never really satisfied with the way it looked. I thought it always looked like, you know, melted plastic to me instead of a,
Well,
you
you
know,
probably use maybe too much heat. It wouldn't take very much to make it a little bit, you know, elastic or flexible.
right. I remember one time I was trying to go from the inside and kind of push out, so you get those bulging things.
Right.
But then what happened is, if you push too far, the lettering on the side of the car became stretched, and it didn't, you know, it almost looked like you're blowing up a balloon with the letter on the side of it. It just
Oh,
didn't look right to me. I've tried it before, and so I've let it go, and I've never really pursued doing that again. I mean, some of these cars now are pretty old. They might not even make that you see in this clinic. I probably won't use some of them anymore because um they're kind of old, and they should look really distressed and beat up. You know, I'm modeling 1995, and a lot of these gondolas are probably 60s, 70s vintage, and if on the prototype. I'm going to try doing this on some of the more almost like bathtub type gondolas that you see in scrap service now.
mhm.
I'm going to try using this same technique on that and see how those turn out.
Yeah.
It'll be a little interesting there. It'll be a little different too, because the colors on those are mostly black. So it might end up being using a lighter color of the weathering powders and the oil paints. I just have to experiment.
Yeah, I think the newer cars have actually a thinner wall than what these would be too.
That's
And-
probably true too.
and it
Yes.
wouldn't take too much heat to,
Right.
get a little movement on them.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm just not sure of what the best approach would be. If it would be trying a soldering iron with something around it, or just a heat gun, and then like a pencil or something to push out on the
Maybe-
sides or dent in.
Maybe
or-
something like a hair dryer, which is a little less heat than a heat gun.
Could be, yeah.
I remember an article in the past where they used a small piece of metal and they heated it with a soldering iron and then moved it away and then pushed out on the panel between the ribs. And I did a gondola. Somehow it ended up on Steve Shore's layout, but it actually turned out pretty well.
Did it?
Um,
Okay.
It might be a good technique, yeah.
So Kevin, I just for the heck of it, I would throw out, could you take it all apart and put it in the oven, heat it up, and then so that it would kind of be very moldable, and then you could like almost like a clay pot, mold it however you wanted
I
to.
don't know. That might be something that you could try.
I don't know. Greg,
might
you put
get
stuff
too
in the
much.
oven before. How does plastics work when you put some of your buildings in there? Can you mold it?
Well, yeah, I had purchased a lot of Magnuson buildings that had been in a fire, and the walls were all completely warped out and were very crooked. And I basically laid them out on a piece of plywood covered with tinfoil and put them in the oven at a low temperature and watched them until they flattened out. And they ended up being virtually undamaged. But I think what you're looking at in the realm of a stock car, not a stock car, a gondola, is if you put it in the oven, you're risking melting and disforming the car itself, and
Yeah,
it might be difficult to actually use it from that point forward.
yeah, I think
I
so.
think you have to be a little more specific with the heat you're using rather than just an overall, oven melt.
Yeah, you would want to really have a very, you wouldn't want to warp the car too much because then it'd be really a lousy car that would be running on the railroad.
Right.
It wouldn't,
Right.
the trucks probably wouldn't be right and all that stuff. I mean, you
this-
take all the hardware off, but it's still the body itself is part of the structure of the car.
Yeah, this whole conversation has got me really interested. I'm gonna do some research and see if I can't find some good techniques somewhere that somebody I know I've seen the one, like I said, they use a really thin styrene and they kind of
Mhm.
put it in between the ribs, and it's just slightly tight so it bulges out a little bit, and it looked really good, but I thought, man, how many pieces would I mess up before I got the first one to fit, and then I've got 20 more panels on each side.
The only
So-
problem with that is you'd have the bulge on the outside, but the inside would still be flat.
Right.
that
And,
would-
and you'd still have to use some kind of a heat mechanism to
Yeah, I
make
think-
that match.
I think
Yeah.
something like heating up a spoon or something like that would work pretty well. And
Yeah.
if it's a little thinner car, then those,
If you're
Okay.
just talking about denting, the upper lip on there, I'm sure that, you could heat something up and just do some minor little wavy dents on the top would
Yeah.
probably be an effective way to do that. But the bulging sides has always been something that,
yeah,
like I said, I tried a couple different things and they're in the garbage. But so
Now,
anyway,
I've tried the soldering iron, the wood burning kit, and the heat gun. And what I found is it's difficult to get good, consistent, repeatable work. I try to just emphasize it on the top rails. And what I've done with the heat gun is I get little block of wood that's slightly wider than the top of the car, and I heat one side up, and I just put the block in there at an angle and then twist it around so it's flat and then pull it out, twist it back again. And it actually bows the side out and it'll shape the top rail And then I've used the wood burning kit to make some dents, I'll call them, or bangs on the top rail. I haven't done the detail inside like you've done. I've done the painting and the coloring, but I haven't had the extra details. But I think the pencil shavings and fine file savings and whatever else you have was a good idea.
Yeah, yeah, it just I'm always on the lookout for stuff, you know. I'll have stuff that something's packed in something, or something's you know, in my garage I find, and I always try to think of, God, what could I use this for? And I was just emptying up my pencil savings one day, and I don't know, some of you probably heard me tell my story about the wood chip card that I made, that I, you know, used sawdust for the top layer of that. Um, and it just kind of reminded me of the same thing, but it even had, you know, it had some, you know, little graphite flakes in there and some little colored,
Yeah.
with the, you know, paint on the pencil, and it just looked like, it just reminded me of this, and I thought, I'm going to try this. And so,
I think like any modeling project, you got to have a good reference photo to start from.
right, right.
Stand on an overpass and see if you can get some empty gondolas that are scrap
Mhm. And
cards.
yeah, and the ones that, you know, like in the photos on in this presentation, I mean, they're filthy. Nobody's in there sweeping them out or cleaning them out. You know, I don't think they go to the rip track and you know, clean out cars like they do the dunnage and box cars and stuff, if they're just going to be, you know, loaded again. So
Yeah.
um
Good
another
suggestion would be to go to a swap meet and pick up a half dozen cheap cars before you start doing some of your more expensive cars.
right, especially when it comes to the denting and stuff.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
To
yeah,
experiment with something
exactly.
that's a little bit less expensive, let's say.
Right, for sure. Um, I didn't get a picture of it, but I've also done some of the. I saw when I was still working at Boeing there at the Auburn plant. I used to walk a lot on nice days, and there's a trail inside the plant that's right along the UP main line there, and you know, lunchtime I'd go out and I'd take my walk, and I saw a lot of they have that trash train that goes by every day. And then in the end of the train is always a load of contaminated soil and earth, and they always have the netting over the top of them, or the plastic over them to keep the dust, you know, because it's contaminated. And so I modeled a couple of those, um, that I'm thinking about maybe putting a little short clinic on how to do it. It turned out pretty good. But another thing I saw on one of those trains is they had a scrap metal load on some of those bigger bathtub style gondolas, those, you know, heavier, taller cars, and they had that same kind of a cover, only it was a mesh. It was like a netting almost that went over the whole top to keep the, I don't know if it was a lighter type metal that was in there to keep them from falling out. But I used that Thule fabric, and I found some that was actually orange, like the netting I'd seen on those, and did a couple of those. So I've got a couple of those cars I'll show sometime too. But that's another interesting, and it's a scrap load basically, only it's just on a piece of foam core. You just put your, you know, your stuff on there, glue it down, paint it up, and then wrap that Thule fabric around there, and it the only thing I wish you could do is I wish you could make some HO scale winds, so when it's going, you know, it flaps. Like the lumber car wraps, you know. But
Mm.
oh. Well, anything else on this?
Oh, good presentation.
Well, thank you. It's a short one, but I tried to drag it out, make it halfway lengthy. But yeah, I just dawned on me that I forgot I'd done that, and thought, well, that's uh incidentally, in May, stop sharing here. In May, I've got a really interesting clinic lined up, more of a prototype thing than a modeling thing, but a fellow by the name of Dan Bollard, who I've known for a long time. He grew up in the same hometown I did over in Ephrata in Eastern Washington. And he's going to be joining us and giving a presentation on derailments, wrecks, and other things in Eastern Washington. So there'll be a lot of Burlington Northern, a lot of Milwaukee Road, some UP, some short line stuff. But he's got just a wealth of photographs of these things and the history on what happened and what was the result on that. So it'd be I think it's going to be a fun little presentation that he'll give there. That's coming up. I think I'll have to check. Did I say May? It might be June that he committed to. I'll have to look at my schedule again. But anyway, he's a historian, an amateur historian, but he comes up with all these old historic photographs, and he's also interested in trains and so he's going to join us on, I think it's June actually, but we'll let you know. So can look forward to that.
Kevin, you had said that you didn't have clinicians for July and August. Is that because we're going to shut down for the 2 months?
Not necessarily, but I just decided that I'm going to try to fill up the rest of the months first before we do those two. Just because, historically when we were meeting in person all the time, those are the couple months we'd take off. But I'm certainly not opposed to having those months. I personally in July will not be here for the July one. Going to go to London. Our daughter's expecting a baby at the 1st of July, so we'll be gone for 2 weeks during that time. But no, I'm just filling up the ones we normally do. But by all means, we could still get together, especially now that we're doing Zoom thing. It's I think I don't know what the original reason was for not having July and August. I'm assuming that it was vacations and that type of thing. Then that led to that schedule. But
I had a comment about using soldering irons to put bulges in the sides of gondolas.
Sure.
I tried it. I won't say that I'm a very good modeler, number one. It is when you melt the plastic, it smells really bad.
Yes, it does.
And that plastic, once it melts, is extremely difficult to get off your soldering iron.
Oh, yeah, I can imagine.
So there's an answer to that. If you don't mind me popping in here.
Not at all.
It's not, you can't touch the soldering iron to the plastic. That's rule number one.
Yeah,
the other part of it is you're basically warming the plastic so that it's pliable. And once you warm it up, then you can start moving it with your finger or a gloved finger if you don't want to burn your finger. But you can't, you have to avoid touching any of the plastic body with the actual soldering iron, because you will leave a burn mark or a divot.
Yeah,
my experience speaks.
Right through it.
Yeah, I think that's why you would want to use a hair dryer rather than a hot air gun, because a hair dryer is quite a bit lower heat temperature than a soldering iron or any of those.
Right.
You just have to be more patient because it takes a lot longer.
Yeah, well,
Yes.
maybe that's a good thing to do, though. Just be patient.
Heck, I want
You want a good result.